Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Directions Mag Geospatial webinar, today sponsored by our friends at Geocortex. I'm Barbara Duke, Managing Editor here at Directions Mag, with our assistant webinar producer, Lynette Qualia. We are excited to welcome back Aaron Oxley from Geocortex. He has got some really cool demos to share with you guys today about Geocortex Inline. Welcome back.
So, thank you, Barbary, for the intro. I'm Aaron Oxley. And I'm here to talk to you today about Geocortex Inline. So specifically, building next level LRS apps with Geocortex Inline. And I'll use that term LRS a lot today. It stands for linear referencing system, or linear reference system, linear referencing, linear data. There's a lot of definitions. They're all okay. It's all LRS. Now, before we get into the fun stuff, into the meat of things here, I know that on the registration form for this webinar, there was a field asking, what would you like to learn? And I learned from those responses that quite a few folks here want to learn about LRS itself. So before I go too far, I just want to poll the room to find out where we stand on linear asset management. Okay, great. So with that in mind, so linear referencing, it's really just a different way of storing geographic locations. Most of the time, spatial data is based on a geographic coordinate system, like the XY coordinates that we all know. And in that case, Earth is the reference. Everything is relative to an origin, a 0, 0, where the prime meridian and the equator meet. And every location on Earth has two values. You've got X, which is the horizontal distance from the origin, and Y, the vertical distance from the origin. But if everything falls along one line, if all of our assets or features or events, if all of our data is positioned along a single line, why do we need two values, an X and a Y? We don't. And that is where linear referencing systems come into play. So feature geometry gets stored with a single value, the M value for measure, and that's based on the measured distance from the start of the line. So if you've seen M values in your data when you're doing queries or looking at your attributes, you've already got LRS. It has a few benefits over traditional geographic coordinate systems. First, the data can be very accurate and at a much lower cost than what's needed to collect latitude and longitude coordinates with high accuracy, especially if there's a requirement for precision for something like digging. If you're digging for a pipe or a cable, being a few feet off means you're not going to find the asset you're digging for. You're digging lots of holes. And second, the data is simpler. There's less information to collect. When we can see that this mark here is just defined by 14 instead of a set of coordinates, it's a lot easier to collect that information. It's a lot less effort required to get it drawn on a map, to calculate directions, or to perform analysis on a group of features. When the data is simplified, everything else becomes simpler too. Now, if you don't have LRS, it's actually not that complicated to get your linear assets into a linear reference system. ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro, they both come with geoprocessing tools to configure your data into an LRS. So if you have some in-house GIS skills, it's just a matter of following step-by-step tutorials from Esri. They're available online, really straightforward. We have had customers, though, who preferred to avoid that work. So we do offer it as a service for anyone who wants to take advantage of Geocortex Inline, but doesn't have LRS data yet. That's not an obstacle. If you don't know if you have linear assets or what they might be, some examples. Best example is definitely transportation, roads and highways. Things like managing bridges, safety and maintenance, and highways, columns, culverts, or knowing where there's more traffic so that you know where improvements and expansions need to happen, or what roads attract larger vehicles, where the truck traffic is, so you need more frequent maintenance in those areas, just for example. Utilities are another great example, whether it's water or electric networks, phone lines. More recently, fiber optic seems to be a big one. All cables, whether they're transmitting power or data, they're all linear assets. Also streams and rivers, pipelines, sewers and wastewater, railroads. The world that we live in is full of linear assets, and they all need to be managed. They're kind of difficult to manage just by nature. Hopefully now we can all see how LRS is necessary for good linear asset management, but there's still a problem. All these assets have multiple attributes. There's a bunch of data that we're interested in, and it's hard to visualize on a map. Let me give an example. So roads, like I said, this is the most common example of a linear asset. This is a segment of road, and it would be fine to draw it on a map, just like this. We can see all the information. There just isn't that much information there. It's the geometry of the road, so we can see where it sits on a map, but that's not very useful. In a geographic information system, we want information, right? So let's add some data. Let's start with the speed limits along this road. Nice, that looks good. We can see where the different speed limits start and end, but we want to see the speed data to decide if these limits are safe. So let's add some accident data and we can compare. So we add our accidents, and this is starting to become useful. We can see that there were a few accidents where it went to 60 miles per hour. So maybe we're starting to actually get some meaning out of this. But we also need to know where bus lanes exist. So those get drawn onto the map as well. And we also have road type data, which helps us schedule maintenance. So we'll need to draw that on the map too. But now, where was that bus lane? And where did the speed change from 50 to 60? This is the problem. Maps are top down. So by nature, it's really tough to visualize multiple attributes, especially on a linear asset. And the solution is to get this data onto a diagram. Instead of stacking the attributes on top of each other, if we split it all out into a cross section, we can see all of the data. Now, this is known as a straight line diagram. And with it, this data is becoming useful. We see the information in this format. It becomes easy to manage the field operations for maintenance, to analyze traffic patterns and accidents, to help with good decision making for the safety side of things. Now imagine if this diagram used live data from your GIS, so it was always up to date. Or even better, what if you could put it into a web mapping application alongside a map so that you have the context of all your other GIS data there to help make it more useful? And what if it was interactive? Instead of only serving as a point of reference, what if you could edit data from within this diagram and add new features, link out to other systems like your asset management system if you have CityWorks or Novotics, creating service requests and work orders in those third-party systems? That is Geocortex Inline. And that's what I am here to show you today. So without further ado, maybe I'll give you a quick description. It transforms your linear reference data into dynamic diagrams, basically visualizing information in more meaningful ways, making it easier to work with your data and analyze it to make good decisions and manage your linear assets effectively and efficiently. Okay, let's dive into a demo. Now I'm going to pull this down. You should be looking at a Geocortex Inline web mapping application now, hopefully. Can you confirm, Barbary, if you're looking at a blank desktop? Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so this is a Geocortex application. It's in our viewer for HTML5, and there are some tools available up here. And we have the classic I want to menu. It's a fully functional GIS web mapping application, and we've just added Geocortex Inline as a component. It's not only for Geocortex viewers though. Geocortex Inline can also work in a web app builder application, or in the future, we're looking at Experience Builder. This is a web app builder application that has Inline added. It's really easy with a widget. and it has all the same functionality as it would in a Geocortex viewer. The rest of the viewer is really just a viewer, but Geocortex Inline is identical. Back to our viewer for HTML5. If you're just getting started, there is a built-in tour guide over here to walk us through everything, but I'm not gonna let that steal my thunder. We've got tips and tricks over here, just making sure that end users know what they can do with the diagrams, how they can do a little bit of manipulation within the application itself. Let's give it a try though. So first we have this route selector. I can pick that, and when I hover my mouse on the map, it will highlight the nearest available route. Now, alternatively, I can come to this route text box and start typing in a route ID, and Inline will automatically search the layer with my routes and make suggestions to auto-complete this ID. But I'm going to use the picker. I will select, gotta go to the route picker, and I'll select this one here. And next, I need to select my range on the route. So I can either use this elastic snapping tool to select my start and end points, or I can enter them manually in these boxes if I need a very specific range. I'll use this snapping tool and select a section. And now we have some data in our diagram. If I drag my mouse back and forth across the diagram, you'll notice that the X on the line up in the map is moving with me. The two are synchronized. In Geocortex Inline, I'm just going to make this panel a bit bigger. We call these color-coded sections bands. And it's basically just a way to group together related data. In this case, the top one here includes all the point features like traffic lights and intersections. And I should point out that each band can be adjusted. If I click this little menu here, we can turn layers off and on. We can move this band down or back up the page. We can adjust the size, make it really big or really small, or restore it to what it was when we first opened. Or if we don't want any of this information, we can just tuck it away. We also have some geography, city and county, that is for cost attribution, and then attribution for physical information on the highway. Now, all this information is about assets. If you notice in the top right corner here, we have a drop-down box to select the view. And if I switch from assets to transportation, we get a whole new set of data. So here we're looking at average daily traffic, at speed limits, and at the number of through lanes. So again, we're able to move the mouse across the diagram and easily see where things are changing. For example, this section of highway here only has about half the average daily traffic of the adjacent sections. But if I come down to the lanes band though, we can see that there are only 3 lanes for this section. So that explains the dip in daily traffic. Just a simple example of how Inline helps me visualize my data and just drawing simple conclusions like that with only a few bands of basic demo data here. Let's say that I already have most of the data that I need here, but sometimes my users need to pull in data from other systems. Maybe a field worker has collected some data that isn't in our GIS system yet, or maybe a contractor or a member of the public has provided some data that doesn't belong in our GIS, but we still want to visualize it in Geocortex Inline. Could be locations of storefronts that are affected by a road closure, like a parade or something, or it could be locations of underground cables that are owned by private companies. So that doesn't belong in our GIS, but we sure do need to see that with the other data if we're going to be doing any work on these roads that requires digging. So for example, when we're looking at the assets information, we've got all this physical attribution for the road, and we might be using this to decide on construction projects that include digging. So we can upload data to add a band on the fly as an end user. What I have here today is that last example I mentioned, cable crossings. So if you can imagine that maybe this comes from a private organization, and as a municipal government managing these roads, we want to use it in our planning so that we don't need to call before we dig every time. We know it all in advance. Whatever the data is though, we can click this little button here and we'll give the band a name. I'm going to call it cable crossings. Data source is spreadsheet, and we'll choose the file, cable crossings, open that one, and I'll click next. And we have a few options to let Inline know how to visualize this data. So measure is measure, pretty straightforward. Tooltip, I will show the type, and route field is route ID. And there we go. So that data has now been added. Down here we have a cable crossings band, and we've got a couple of items there and right there. So again, just a fairly simple example here, but just showing how an end user can add some data to help make use of what's already available in the views that have been created by an administrator. Now, let's take a closer look at some of this data. Coming up to the top here, as I move my mouse along, I'm looking at the X there, and I can see that this bridge maybe is something that I'm interested in. It's the bridge that crosses over Northside Drive Southwest. That's the one that I want. And we can see where it starts, and we can see where it ends. Now, if I click on it, I get all the feature details, just like if I were to click on it on the map. And you'll also notice down here I have more info, which will take me to the REST endpoint for this layer. And if I come back, we've also got the zoom to feature button, which changes the extent accordingly. Now I'll reset my start and endpoints. I'll go to, let's go 55 to 60, just a bit of a bigger stretch for this next bit. Okay, so one of the more interesting things that we've seen people doing with Geocortex Inline is adding workflows, and that can bring a whole nother world of functionality. We have one configured here on this bridges layer to create a project. The idea is that when a bridge needs maintenance, when we're doing a capital project on it, if it's due for repairs, a couple things need to happen. Number one, we want to create a project feature to track the progress. And number two, we need to create service requests for each abutting parcel. So if I right click on this bridge that we selected and select create project, we get a form on the left here that needs to be filled out. So I will put in my name and a description and a priority. Now, this project area, this is just defining how wide of a net I'm casting for parcels. So I can adjust this buffer a little bit. That looks good to me. And we'll click Create Project. Now, the workflow takes care of the rest here. We now have this project feature and several service request features, one for each parcel that was within that 275-foot range. These service request features might be used for something like a simple mailing label, a report from Geocortex reporting to notify owners of these parcels about the construction, just so that they can voice their opinions, common municipal use case. Or they might be for inspections, like environmental stuff. Maybe a conservation officer can check if there are any red-cockaded woodpeckers nesting on these properties before construction proceeds. There's a ton of possibilities. These probably don't actually apply in your situation. And maybe the mailing labels, probably not the woodpeckers. Whatever linear assets you have though, whatever you need to do with them, I hope I've explained this enough that you can kind of imagine how these dynamic diagrams in Geocortex Inline might work for you. It might not be environmental inspections or mailing labels. You might be buffering for nearby culverts to put together a maintenance plan, or your linear asset might be a water main and you're buffering for downstream valves. The idea is the same in every case though. Inline gives you more power to work with your linear assets as part of your GIS. And going back to where we started, linear assets are tough to manage without LRS. I don't think anyone should even try it. LRS is tough to manage without Geocortex Inline. It gives you better visibility for your linear assets, and it simplifies management. It opens up doors to almost anything with the Geocortex workflow, connecting it to other systems. Inline can really basically be the sole point of contact for your entire linear asset management system. Now, I was hoping that we'd have a few minutes to spare here so that I can show off the Inline Designer, where we build these views, where the magic happens, and we do. So I want to show you that. But first, I've got another poll. Based on what you've seen so far here, are you interested in improving linear asset management with an LRS and Geocortex Inline?
Yeah, so we'll give you just a few seconds, folks, to click those answers. And just remind everyone that if you have questions for Aaron, go ahead and start typing those in. We may have a couple minutes at the end to address a couple of those questions, so go ahead and share those. They'll certainly follow up with anything that we can't get to during the session. All right, so Aaron, back to you.
Thank you. Okay, so let's take a peek at the designer. I'm going to come to apps.geocortex.com. This is like a hub for all of our SaaS apps. Geocortex Inline here, I can launch it. You'll notice this sign-on button. It's use ArcGIS Online to sign in. So by default at apps.geocortex.com, ArcGIS Online, your organization will be your identity provider. So anyone in your organization could be granted access to Geocortex Inline. Alternatively, if you don't use ArcGIS Online, or if you'd prefer to use Portal, we've got that option available as well. I'm going to sign out here, and you'll notice I'm now at a subdomain of apps.geocortex.com. This is free and easy to set up. We do it for every customer, same-day turnover if you want one of these. And now I am using ArcGIS Enterprise Portal to sign in. So now my on-premises portal is my identity provider and my data store. Nothing ever leaves my environment. I'll sign in here. And first obvious thing we can do is create a new view. I will set new map options and go next. So the first thing that it wants is a URL of an ArcGIS service. And this is going to be the centerlines layer, sort of what everything revolves around in this view. In the Georgia Department of Transportation data that we were just looking at, interstates is our center line, the main piece that everything works around. So I'll grab this URL, copy that, and paste it into here. We've got an online geometry server in here as a sample. I don't recommend using that in a production application, but for today, that's fine. So Inline has now queried that feature service, and it's found all the layers, and it's asking me what I want to use as my center line. I'll pick interstates and say next. A route ID, this is the unique identifier for segments. Route ID, pretty straightforward. And this comes from the ArcMap geoprocessing tools to get the data into LRS. It gives you these sort of names by default. Route name is for labeling, interstate name. Click next there. And I know that my data is measured in miles. We see feet every once in a while, but typically things get put into miles. So just like that, we've got a view created, but there is no data in it. It's just an empty view, no bands, no charts. So pretty straightforward. If I click add new band, we've got a new band. I'll click that band, and I'm going to skip over all these general options, just tuck that away. we just want to add a chart. And there's a chart. I'll click on that one to start working with it. And we have an error here. It wants me to select a data source, but these are just the basics. We don't want those. Let's add a new data source. And again, it's gone out and queried that feature service. It comes back with all the layers. I'll pick this top one, intersections. And I need to tell Inline how to visualize this data. So the unique ID field, typically going to be object ID. The centerline join field, so this will be the same thing that I specified as the unique route identifier on my centerlines layer, route ID. And measure field, it's got to be measure, right? Let's apply that. And the last thing we need to do is just tell Inline how we want this visualized in a line, a linear, or a scatter chart in this case, because I know that these are point features. So with that, we are ready. Let's hit the route selector. Let's select Interstate 20 there. And let's put in a couple of values down here, 55 and 56. Hopefully there's an intersection in that mile. Yeah, there's a bunch. And so we can see here, there's an intersection. There is an intersection. There is an intersection, which is an off-ramp. But yeah, that quickly, I'd say that took, what, a couple of minutes? And I've already got some meaningful data in here, some of my linear assets being represented in inline view in just a couple minutes. Adding more bands, more charts, styling them, adding workflows. It's all done in this designer, and it's all pretty straightforward once you have your LRS data. Now, finally, I know we are getting very, very close here, but I want to leave you with some resources. These links here. So you can always reach out if you don't have time to note these down. But yeah, these links have a lot of good information available, from technical documentation to forums where users are sharing ideas and concepts, to tech tip videos that really focus in on how to make use of certain features. Lots of good stuff there. If you already know enough and you're keen to get started, we do offer free evaluations. Just email info@geocortex.com to get that started. So that's it. I'll hand it back to Barbary. Thank you for everyone for watching. I hope you got something out of this today. I hope you learned a little bit about LRS and Geocortex Inline, and like these last couple slides show, if you want to learn more, let us know, or go out to geocortex.com or our YouTube channel, and there's lots to learn there. Thanks again.
Oh, thank you, Aaron. Yes, we are we're on time, but maybe you have a question or two there that we could answer quickly on our list there.
Yeah, I'm just gonna pull up this chat box. Oh, we got a bunch of questions. Okay, so I just first want to say I will make sure to get back to everybody after this.
Absolutely.
If I don't get to answer all of these right now. Can Inline process XY data from a spreadsheet if that was all that was available? As of now, no, the data does need to get converted. It does need to be LRS data. Is there a way to create a project on a specific section with longer asset? I'm guessing that just means the length of the feature where we're trying to create a project. There are no limitations as far as that goes. We could create a project from mile marker 0 all the way up to the end of the highway. I think the highest values I've seen are a few hundred miles, but there are no technical limitations there. Have you ever done any Maximo integration? Yes, certainly. Geocortex, our systems are tied into Maximo in several of our customer organizations. I don't know if anyone has used Inline with Maximo, but the data formatting it's the same idea, and we've integrated workflow with Maximo, which would be the connecting piece. If you noticed when I was showing workflow, I kind of talked about how that's how we would tie to third-party systems to create work orders or service requests or pull in EAP data. It would be the workflow that does that maximum integration. So yes, absolutely possible. And have you ever created fault location tools for generation and transmission companies? Not that I know of. Mapcom is a part of Vertigis, and they are very much involved in the telecom industry. They're a new part of Vertigis, so I'm not very well acquainted with exactly what they do. But I will certainly, I'll find out a bit more and get back to you on that one, whoever asked that question number 3 there. And number 4, we are evaluating this product as an environmental resources tool for managing stream events, fish habitat culverts, sightings, water quality samples. Very cool. I am an avid angler myself, so I love this. Do you have customers using it this way or examples for us to play with? Not off the top of my head. I can't think of any names, but absolutely, it's possible. We've got at least some sample data to kind of demonstrate how it might work. And I believe we have a couple of customers who might be willing to share what they have done.
Aaron, thanks again. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
Yeah, it's really cool to be able to flip those linear assets on their side and be able to interact with them that way. It's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Have a great day. Tell a friend about Geocortex and Directions Magazine. Thanks, everybody.